They whispered his name like a curse in the shadows of Chicago. Lorenzo Corsetti was not merely a mafia boss. He was vengeance wrapped in an Armani suit, and he never walked without his shadow. That shadow was Titan, a 120-pound cane corso whose black eyes had witnessed more death than most cemetery grounds. Battle-hardened soldiers made the sign of the cross when that beast entered a room. Professional killers chose different hallways rather than share air with him. No one could stand within 10 feet of Lorenzo Corsetti without mentally mapping every possible escape route. Until one rainy November night when a bone-thin bartender with dark circles under her eyes and trembling hands did the impossible. Mia Sullivan did not scream. She did not beg for her life. She did something that froze every breath in that restaurant and rewrote the ancient laws of the Chicago underworld forever. This is the story of how an orphan drowning in debt and despair tamed the most dangerous beast in the city and captured the frozen heart of the monster holding its chain. Welcome back to our story today. Before we dive into this incredible journey, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. Your likes and shares keep these stories alive. Now let us begin. But before that fateful night, Mia Sullivan was nothing more than a fading shadow, struggling to survive in a city without mercy. Her studio apartment sat on the 5th floor of a decaying building on the south side of Chicago, where the stairwell reeked of urine and the cracked walls soaked through whenever it rained. That morning, she woke at 5 o'clock to the heater groaning and then dying in the biting cold of November, her breath clouded white in the air. Mia lay curled beneath 2 thin blankets, staring up at a ceiling stained yellow in uneven patches, wondering whether today would be the day she finally collapsed for good. She was 27 years old but looked closer to 35. A face once praised by Cornell professors for its sharp intelligence had been reduced to bone and shadow. The dark circles beneath her eyes were so deep no makeup could hide them. 11 years earlier, she had lost her parents in a house fire caused by faulty wiring. 11 years earlier, she had become a second mother to Noah when her little brother was only 11. And 3 years ago, she lost everything that remained when Noah was paralyzed from the waist down in a car accident. The crash happened while he was driving her to work. Mia never forgave herself for that. She slipped out of bed, her bare feet meeting the icy wooden floor. The refrigerator was empty, except for half a carton of expired milk and 1 shriveled apple. She opened the desk drawer where red envelopes were piled from the hospital, from the insurance company, from the bank. $400,000. That was the weight pressing on her shoulders like an invisible stone. The cost of Noah's spinal surgery, rehabilitation, medication, daily living. And now a new letter. The words printed in harsh red. Pay $50,000 within 30 days or Noah would be transferred to a public facility. Mia knew what public facility meant. It meant her brother lying in bed 12 hours a day with no one turning him. It meant bed sores eating into his flesh. It meant a slow death in quiet neglect. She worked 3 jobs every day. Mornings cleaning offices for a law firm. Afternoons babysitting for a wealthy family in Lincoln Park. Nights mixing cocktails at Imperiale, the most luxurious restaurant in Chicago. A place she never dared imagine sitting at as a customer. Even combined, it wasn't enough. It was never enough. That afternoon, before her night shift, Mia visited Noah at the rehabilitation center. It was the cheapest facility she could find, and it looked like it. Peeling paint, the smell of cheap disinfectant, nurses worn down by too many patients. Noah sat in his wheelchair by the window, staring out at the gray parking lot. When he saw her, he smiled. A smile Mia knew cost him more effort than he let on. "You're here," he said, his cheer forced but determined. "I managed 15 minutes on the parallel bars today. That's progress, right?" Mia knelt beside the wheelchair and took his hand. She saw the bruises on his arm, where the IV needle had gone in again and again because of an inexperienced nurse. She saw his withered legs beneath the blanket. She saw hope struggling to stay alive in the eyes of her 22-year-old brother she had sworn to protect at any cost. "Does it hurt?" she asked, her voice breaking. "It doesn't hurt," Noah lied. "Don't worry about me. Worry about yourself. You're too thin. Are you even eating?" Mia didn't answer. She only held him tightly, pressing her face into his shoulder so he wouldn't see the tears falling. On the way to Imperial, she passed a pawn shop and caught her reflection in the glass. A gaunt ghost with hollow eyes. She used to be someone. Dr. Mia Sullivan, the youngest animal behavior specialist ever recognized by Cornell. She had a future once. She had dreams. Then Richard Kane took everything away. And now she was just an exhausted bartender trying not to drown in a sea of debt. She didn't know that tonight her life would change forever. She didn't know that by stepping into Imperial that evening, She was walking straight into the orbit of an iron wolf and a beast the entire city of Chicago feared. Imperiala was not just a restaurant. It was a stage where power performed for itself. Mia pushed through the employee's back door and stepped into a world utterly removed from the darkness of her own life. White marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers. The scent of truffle oil and porcini mushrooms drifted through the air. The wine bottles displayed behind glass cost more than her entire year's rent. Mia had worked here for 9 months, and she still hadn't grown used to the feeling that she was a stain amid all this luxury. She changed into her uniform in the cramped staff room, the white shirt and black apron the restaurant required. She looked into the mirror and tried to hide the dark circles beneath her eyes with a bit of cheap powder. It didn't help. She still looked like a walking corpse. But it didn't matter. Guests at Imperial didn't look servers in the eyes. To them, she was only a shadow that delivered drinks and disappeared. She stepped behind the bar and began preparing for her shift. Polishing glasses, arranging bottles, checking the ice. Movements so familiar she could perform them in her sleep. The restaurant slowly filled as the clock edged toward 7 in the evening. Expensive suits, designer dresses. The hollow laughter of Chicago's elite. Mia watched them the way one watches a silent film. She didn't belong to this world, and she knew it. Tony Marchetti, the restaurant manager, passed the bar looking more tense than usual. He was a small man with perpetually anxious eyes, as if waiting for something terrible to happen. Tonight, he looked on the verge of a heart attack. "Sullivan," he murmured hoarsely. "Come here." Mia stepped closer, wiping her hands on her apron. Tony glanced around as though afraid of being overheard, then pulled her into a shadowed corner. "Table 7 tonight," he said, and those 3 words alone were enough to drain the color from the faces of nearby staff. Mia didn't understand. What was special about Table 7? She had served it dozens of times. Always wealthy businessmen who liked to show off and leave generous tips. "Don't stand there looking confused," Tony hissed through clenched teeth. "The owner is coming." The owner. Tony spoke the words as if he were naming death itself. Mia had heard the whispers in the locker room, the stories traded in trembling voices, about the man who owned Imperiale, about the man who owned half of Chicago, about Lorenzo Corsetti. "Listen carefully," Tony said, gripping her arm so tightly his nails bit into her skin. "Don't make eye contact. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't get close unless you're called. And most important of all, if you hear the growl, run." The growl. Mia frowned. What growl? Tony went pale as if she had uttered something blasphemous. "You'll know when you hear it, and pray to God you never do." He released her and vanished into the kitchen, leaving Mia standing there with a dozen unanswered questions. She looked toward Table 7, the most prestigious corner table in the restaurant with a commanding view of the entire room. Tonight it had been prepared with special care. A pristine tablecloth, fresh flowers, and a bottle of wine already waiting in its chilled cradle. The atmosphere in the restaurant began to shift, slowly, as if someone were turning down the volume on the world. Conversations softened, laughter faded. Guests began casting nervous glances toward the entrance, unease hidden beneath practiced smiles. Mia felt the change in the air, something primal and threatening, like the scent of ozone before a storm. She looked down at her hands and realized they were shaking. She didn't know why. She only knew that something was about to happen, something that would change everything. And when the front doors of Imperial opened at exactly 8 o'clock, when darkness seemed to spill inside along with the cold November wind, Mia Sullivan understood for the first time why all of Chicago feared the name Lorenzo Corsetti. Lorenzo Corsetti stepped into Imperiale, and the entire world seemed to tilt toward him. He stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, shoulders as broad as a doorway, a sharply cut face that looked as if it had been carved from Roman marble, and eyes the cold gray of gunmetal at a winter dawn. His black 3-piece suit clung to his frame as though tailored for every line of his body, and the way he moved made it clear he knew he owned every brick beneath his feet. But it wasn't Lorenzo who made the entire restaurant hold its breath. It was what walked beside him. Titan. Mia had never seen a dog like that in her life. The massive cane corso stood nearly level with Lorenzo's hip, its coat pure black as if cut from darkness itself, muscles rolling beneath the skin like braided steel cables. Its cropped ears stood upright like watchtowers, and its black eyes swept the room with the cold calculation of an assassin sizing up prey. No leash, no muzzle, nothing restraining the beast except the presence of the man beside it. Mia watched the way people reacted and felt a chill crawl up her spine. A heavy-set businessman at a table near the entrance nearly spilled his wine as he hurriedly lowered his head. A society woman wearing a diamond necklace abruptly forgot the story she was telling and stared down at her plate. Servers parted to either side like water before a ship's bow. And Tony, the ever-anxious manager, now stood rigid as a statue with a strained smile plastered on his face. Lorenzo didn't look at anyone. He didn't need to. He knew every eye was fixed on him, and he was utterly indifferent to it. He walked toward table 7 with steady, confident steps, each one a declaration of ownership. Titan moved like his shadow, claws clicking softly on the marble floor, the sound rhythmic and precise, like the countdown of a bomb. When Lorenzo sat down, Titan immediately lay at his feet, but the beast's eyes never closed. They continued to scan the room, tracking every movement, every breath, every slightest shift from anyone within 20 paces. Mia stood behind the bar, gripping her polishing cloth so tightly her fingers turned white. She had worked with dogs for 6 years before Richard Kane destroyed her life. She had seen the most aggressive service dogs, attack dogs trained to kill. But she had never seen anything like Titan. This wasn't aggression. This was controlled death. A killing machine waiting for a command. 10 minutes later, another man entered. Councilman Robert Hayes, 52 years old, the fleshy face of a career politician, an expensive gray suit that couldn't hide the sweat slowly spreading across his forehead. Mia recognized him from local news broadcasts, a face always paired with promises of urban development and education reform. Now he looked like a rat walking into a snake's den. Hayes sat down across from Lorenzo, and even from 15 meters away, Mia could see his knees trembling. The conversation unfolded in low voices, murmurs she couldn't make out, but she saw the way Lorenzo sat motionless as stone, only his gray eyes moving slowly, measuring every expression on the councilman's face. She saw Hayes gesture with his hands, his voice rising slightly, words like the vote and 2 more weeks and need more time drifting to her ears. And then she saw Lorenzo do something very small. He turned the platinum ring on his finger and tapped it lightly against the marble tabletop. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was tiny, something that shouldn't have carried far, but somehow it sliced through every noise in the restaurant like a blade. Hayes froze mid-sentence. And beneath the table, Titan lifted his head. A sound slipped from the beast's throat. Not quite a growl. Something deeper, more primal, like the earth trembling before an earthquake. Mia felt it travel through the floor and up her spine. She understood now. This was the growl Tony had warned her about, and she understood why he had told her to run if she ever heard it. Tony appeared beside Mia like a ghost, his face drained white as paper. "Table 7 needs wine," he whispered, thrusting a silver tray into her hands with a bottle of Barolo and 2 hand-blown crystal glasses. That bottle cost $3,000. Don't spill it. Mia wanted to say she couldn't, that she didn't want to go anywhere near the beast lying at Lorenzo Corsetti's feet, that her hands were shaking, that she hadn't eaten all day, that she might faint at any second. But she saw the look in Tony's eyes, the desperation there, and she understood that refusing wasn't an option. Not here. Not with the man seated at table 7. She drew in a deep breath, forcing herself to steady the wild pounding of her heart. Just walk over, set the wine down, pour it, and leave. 30 seconds. She could survive 30 seconds. She lifted the tray and began walking toward table 7. Each step felt like crossing a steel wire strung between 2 skyscrapers. She focused on her breathing, on keeping the tray level, on not looking into the gray eyes watching her from across the room. 10 steps. She passed table 6, where a group of businessmen were celebrating some deal with expensive champagne. 8 steps. She heard loud laughter from table 5, where a young man with a flushed face was showing his phone to his friends. Bradley Morrison, the son of a hedge fund family, infamous for getting drunk and causing trouble in high-end restaurants. 6 steps. Mia could see Lorenzo clearly now, the way he sat motionless like a statue, the way his gray eyes missed nothing. Councilman Hayes was saying something in a pleading tone, but Lorenzo didn't react. 4 steps. Titan looked at her. Mia felt the weight of that gaze like a physical force pressing against her chest. The beast didn't move, but she knew it was tracking every motion, deciding whether she was a threat or something beneath notice. 2 steps. She was almost there. Her fingers clenched the edge of the tray, her heart pounding like a war drum. Just set it down and pour. Just set it down and pour. Just, and then disaster struck. Bradley Morrison, the drunk from table 5, suddenly stood up laughing, eyes glued to his phone, completely unaware of his surroundings. He staggered backward at the exact moment Mia passed behind him. His shoulder slammed into her hip with the uncontrolled force of a man weighing 200 pounds. Time shattered into slow-moving fragments. Mia felt herself lose balance, felt the tray slip from her hands, felt gravity yank her toward the floor. The $3,000 bottle of Barolo flew into the air, spinning in a perfect arc like a scene in slow motion. She saw the chandelier lights reflect off the glass, saw the dark red liquid inside ripple like the sea. Then the bottle came down. It struck the edge of table 7 with a deafening crack and exploded into hundreds of razor-sharp shards. Red wine sprayed like blood, splattering the pristine white tablecloth, Lorenzo's tailored suit, his handcrafted leather shoes. Councilman Hayes screamed in terror and tumbled out of his chair. None of that mattered. What mattered was a shard of glass, sharp as a razor blade, flying at terrifying speed and slicing across Titan's front leg. Blood. Mia saw blood against the black fur, a bright red streak burning like a curse, and she saw something change in Titan's black eyes. 1 second earlier, the dog had been a controlled machine. The next, it was hell unleashed. Titan didn't rise. It detonated from the floor like a cannonball of bone and muscle. The sound that tore from its throat was no longer a noise but a physical force, a shockwave that froze the entire restaurant in primal terror. Mia was still falling, her back not yet touching the floor, when she saw the 120-pound beast launch toward her. Its jaws opened, ivory fangs flashing beneath the chandeliers, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was about to die, not because the dog wanted to kill her, but because it was protecting its owner, and she was the closest threat. Lorenzo's voice rang out somewhere behind her. Titan, Fermo. But the command came too late. The beast had crossed the point of no return, and Mia Sullivan, the orphan drowning in debt, the exhausted bartender with trembling hands, was falling straight into the jaws of death. 120 pounds of muscle and fangs tore through the air with the speed of a bullet. Titan didn't run. It flew. All 4 of the beast's legs left the ground in a perfect leap, its body stretching straight as a black arrow loosed from death's own bow. Mia was still falling, her back less than half a meter from the marble floor, when she saw the massive shadow blot out her entire world. The animal's hot breath washed over her face, carrying the metallic tang of raw meat and something even more primal, the scent of a predator in full fury. She saw its jaws, fangs as long as her fingers, ivory white and sharp enough to tear flesh and bone like paper. She saw its black eyes, no longer cold and calculating but filled with pure rage, the pain of a wounded creature searching for something to destroy. Then Titan slammed into her. The beast's front legs crashed into Mia's shoulders with the force of a motorcycle at full speed. She heard a popping explosion inside her ears and felt the impact ripple through every vertebra in her spine. Her back struck the marble floor, and hundreds of shards from the shattered bottle pierced her skin like tiny needles. Pain. Pain so intense she couldn't scream. Pain so overwhelming the air was driven from her lungs, leaving her gasping like a fish thrown onto shore. Titan pressed down on her, its weight crushing her ribcage, claws scraping the marble on either side of her head with a shrill sound like fingernails dragged across a chalkboard. Its jaws opened and closed above her throat, less than 5 centimeters from her carotid artery. The growl was no longer a sound. It was a physical force, a vibrating wave that rattled her bones, made her teeth clack together, and let her feel every beat of the beast's heart pounding against her chest. Fast, powerful, frenzied. Imperial became hell in an instant. Screams erupted from every direction. A woman shrieked at a pitch so high it nearly shattered the crystal glasses on the tables. A man lunged at his wife and dragged her to the floor as if that could shield them from the beast. Chairs toppled, tables overturned, plates smashed against the floor and shattered. The crowd surged toward the exits, a chaotic mass of primal terror. Someone stepped on someone else's foot. Someone fell and was dragged across the floor. Someone was crying, thin sobs slicing through the screaming. Bradley Morrison, the drunk who had caused it all, stood frozen like a pillar of salt, eyes bulging, his trousers soaked after losing control of his bladder. He wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't obey. He could only stand there and watch the beast tear into the girl he had just knocked down. Tony Marchetti collapsed behind the bar, clutching his head with both hands, his mouth muttering prayers he hadn't remembered since he was 12 years old. Councilman Hayes crawled across the floor, his gray suit smeared with red wine and food, trying to escape the danger zone without standing up, terrified of drawing the beast's attention. And Lorenzo Corsetti stood amid all that chaos like a rock in the center of a storm. He had risen at some point, his body drawn tight as a wire, one hand slipping inside his suit jacket where Mia knew a gun had to be. But he didn't draw it. He couldn't shoot Titan. Mia saw it in his gray eyes, the struggle between survival instinct and something deeper, more painful. This dog was the last thing his father had left him. To shoot it would be to shoot his own heart. "Titan!" Lorenzo roared, his voice slicing through the screams like a blade. "Fermo, stop." Titan didn't listen. The beast was too far gone, too deep in its fury. too lost in the pain and the memory of the night its former master fell and never stood again. It was protecting Lorenzo in the only way it knew, by destroying every threat, by becoming the nightmare no one dared approach. Titan, Fermo, Lorenzo shouted again, his voice breaking at the end, and it was the first time Mia had ever heard anything other than cold control in the voice of Chicago's Iron Wolf. Desperation, pain, the helplessness of the most powerful man in the city, standing there watching the creature he loved about to kill an innocent person and being unable to stop it. Titan's jaws closed, so close Mia felt its fangs brush the skin of her neck, so close she smelled blood on its breath, its own blood from the wound in its leg. This was the moment she would die. She knew it with absolute certainty. No one could save her. Lorenzo wouldn't shoot. The crowd was too terrified to intervene, and the beast pinning her down had crossed every boundary of control. But in that instant, when death was only a bite away, something inside Mia Sullivan's mind suddenly woke up, a part that had been buried for 6 years beneath the ashes of betrayal and humiliation, a part Richard Kane had tried and failed to destroy. That part looked into Titan's crazed eyes and didn't see a monster. It saw a creature in pain, terrified, desperately searching for something it had lost and would never recover. And that part knew exactly what to do. Mia didn't run. She didn't scream. She didn't close her eyes and wait for death the way any normal person would, when 120 pounds of muscle and fangs were crushing their chest. Instead, she did the exact opposite of every survival instinct. She let her body go limp. Every muscle, from her shoulders down to her toes, from her jaw to her fingers, released as if she were already dead. Her weight sank into the icy marble floor, soft, yielding, offering no resistance, no challenge. This was the first language she had learned while studying canine behavior, a language older than words themselves, the language of the weak submitting to the strong to be spared. Titan sensed the change instantly. The growl in its throat dropped slightly, not disappearing, but losing its most frenzied edge. Its black eyes were still wild, but something flickered there, a flash of confusion cutting through the fog of rage. Mia slowly tilted her head to the side, exposing her throat to the beast. By every normal logic, this was suicide. She was offering the most vulnerable part of her body to fangs that could sever a carotid artery in less than a second. But it was also the ultimate signal of submission in canine society. A declaration that she was not a threat, that she accepted a lower position, that she placed her life entirely in the hands of the dominant one. Titan froze. Its jaws were still open, saliva dripping onto Mia's neck, hot and slick. But it didn't bite. It waited. The predator's instinct locked in combat with something deeper, older, social rules carved into canine genes over thousands of years. Mia began to make a sound. Not words, not a whisper, but something more primal. A soft clicking of her tongue against the roof of her mouth, slow and rhythmic, steady as a heartbeat. Then a long, controlled exhale through her nose, low and resonant like wind passing through stone. This was a technique she had learned during years of working with psychologically traumatized service dogs, animals that had witnessed violence and carried fear in every cell. The sound worked directly on the nervous system, lowering cortisol, slowing the heart rate, awakening the part of the brain responsible for safety and calm. Buono tesoro, she murmured, Italian spilling out unconsciously from her years working with European working dogs. Good boy, sweetheart. Piano, bello. Easy now, beautiful one. Piano. Her voice was low and even, not a trace of trembling in it, though her heart was pounding like a war drum. She didn't look into Titan's eyes, because direct eye contact was a challenge, a declaration of war. Instead, she looked at its chest, the space between its broad shoulders, where thick black fur rose and fell with each breath. Titan was no longer growling. The sound in its throat had shifted into a deep, confused rumble, as if the beast no longer understood what was happening. Its instincts screamed that this was an enemy, that it must destroy, that its master had to be protected. But every signal from the woman beneath it said the opposite. There was no scent of fear coming from her, no resistance, no threat. Mia slowly raised one hand, palm down, fingers loose. She didn't grab, didn't clutch, didn't reach for the dog's head the way most people would. She simply moved her hand to Titan's chest, touched the thick velvet like fur, and held it there. This was a pressure point she had used hundreds of times before. A place that didn't trigger a sense of control, yet communicated peace in an almost miraculous way. She applied the lightest pressure, as if pushing against a door in the wind, paired with a long exhale. 1 second passed, 2 seconds, 3. The entire restaurant remained frozen in silence, no one daring to breathe too loudly, no one daring to move. Lorenzo stood as if turned to stone, his hand still inside his jacket, gray eyes unblinking as he watched the impossible scene unfolding before him. Then the miracle happened. Titan stepped back, just one small step, claws tapping softly against the marble. But it was a step. Mia continued, her voice still whispering gentle Italian words, her hand still resting on the beast's chest, her breathing still slow and steady. "Bravo, ragazzo. Good boy. Bravo." Titan stepped back again. Then another step. Its weight no longer crushed Mia's chest. Its hot breath no longer washed over her throat. The beast sat back on its haunches, head tilted to one side, looking at her with a confused expression, as if for the first time in 2 years, it didn't know what to do next. Mia slowly sat up, shards of glass sliding from her back, blood from dozens of small cuts seeping through her white shirt and blooming into red spots like petals. She never took her eyes off Titan, never stopped making the soft sounds, never stopped radiating absolute calm. The dog didn't move. It just sat there, watching her, and in its black eyes, for the first time since Don Salvatore Corsetti fell 2 years earlier, there was something other than rage and pain. There was curiosity, there was recognition, and maybe, just maybe, there was a flicker of hope. Imperial looked like a battlefield after the last of the crowd had finally been evacuated. Chairs lay scattered, tables overturned, plates shattered across the marble floor now soaked in red wine and glass shards. The scent of $3,000 Barolo mixed with the lingering smell of fear in the air. But no one cared about the wreckage. Every eye was fixed on the slender young woman sitting on the floor, blood seeping through her white shirt, with the most dangerous beast in Chicago lying quietly beside her like a gentle puppy. Lorenzo walked toward her, each step echoing through the silence like a hammer strike. He stopped 2 meters away, gray eyes sweeping from Mia to Titan and back again, trying to make sense of what had just happened through logic he couldn't find. "Who are you?" His voice wasn't a question. It was a command, cold and sharp as a blade. Mia looked up, and for the first time she faced the Iron Wolf of Chicago directly. She saw the danger in his eyes, the cold calculation of a man who had killed and wouldn't hesitate to kill again if needed. But she saw something else as well. Curiosity, and perhaps, buried deep beneath the ice, a flicker of astonishment he was trying to conceal. "I'm just a bartender," she answered, her voice rough with exhaustion. Lorenzo studied her for a few more seconds, then turned to the man who had appeared behind him. Frank DeLuca, his right hand, a man with salt and pepper hair and the sharp eyes of someone who had spent a lifetime digging through other people's secrets. "Investigate her," Lorenzo ordered. "Everything, from the moment she was born to what she had for breakfast today. I want it all in 15 minutes. Frank nodded and vanished, phone already pressed to his ear. Lorenzo turned back to Mia, then did something no one else in the restaurant would have dared to do. He sat down on the floor directly across from her, ignoring the $10,000 suit and the spreading pool of wine. Titan lifted its head as its master approached, but it didn't growl, didn't threaten. The dog simply looked at Lorenzo for a moment, then lowered its head again, this time resting it on Mia's thigh, as if that was where it belonged. Lorenzo watched the scene with an unreadable expression. 2 years, he said, his voice low and heavy. 2 years I tried to treat him. 3 trainers. 1 lost an arm. The best veterinarians in Chicago refused to come near him. And you, a bartender with trembling hands, did what no one else could in minutes. Mia didn't reply. She kept stroking Titan's fur, slow, steady movements, maintaining the calm she had created. 12 minutes later, Frank returned. He held a tablet, the screen glowing with lines of information Mia knew would tear down the wall she had built over 6 years. "Sir," Frank said, his voice carrying something like surprise he couldn't quite hide. "She's not just a bartender." Lorenzo stood and took the tablet, gray eyes scanning each line. Mia watched his expression shift from curiosity to shock to something far more complex. "Dr. Mia Sullivan," he read aloud, his voice slow as if savoring each word. "Earned a doctorate in animal behavior at Cornell at 24 years old, the youngest in the department's history. Leading specialist in working dogs and behavioral intervention. Guest lecturer at 4 universities. Author of 17 cited research papers." Mia closed her eyes. She knew what came next. "And then," Lorenzo continued, his voice turning colder, "the scandal. Accused of causing the death of a federal working dog valued at $200,000. License revoked, banned from the field, disappeared from all professional records." He lowered the tablet and looked at her. "You're not just a bartender, Dr. Sullivan." Mia opened her eyes and met Lorenzo's gaze. "I wasn't always a bartender," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 6 years of injustice and despair. But someone took everything I had. And now bartender is all I have left. Silence stretched between them like a wire pulled tight to the breaking point. Titan remained still, breathing evenly. The first time in 2 years the dog was truly relaxed in the presence of a stranger. "Who?" Lorenzo asked. One word, but Mia knew exactly what he meant. "Richard Kane," she answered, the name leaving her mouth like venom. "My mentor, the person I trusted more than anyone, and the man who destroyed my life to cover up his own mistake." Lorenzo didn't react to the name Richard Kane. He simply stored it away the way one files the name of a target to be dealt with later. He signaled to Frank, and the consigliere vanished at once to dig deeper into the past of the man who had destroyed the life of the gaunt bartender sitting on the floor of his restaurant. Lorenzo looked down at Titan, the dog still lying quietly with its head resting on Mia's thigh, black eyes half closed in a state of calm he hadn't seen since his father fell. For 2 years he had tried everything. He hired the most expensive trainers. He brought in the best veterinarians. He even flew specialists from Europe at costs reaching hundreds of thousands of dollars. No one had managed anything except getting bitten and fleeing. And this girl, with trembling hands and dark circles beneath her eyes, had done the impossible in minutes. He needed her. The realization irritated him. Lorenzo Corsetti didn't need anyone. He owned people, used them, discarded them when they no longer had value. But this girl possessed something his money couldn't buy, a gift he couldn't steal or threaten into submission. He had to negotiate, and Lorenzo hated negotiating. "Frank found information about your brother," he said, his voice giving nothing away. "Noah Sullivan, 22 years old, paralyzed from the waist down after a car accident 3 years ago. Currently in a low-cost rehabilitation center on the south side. Requires an experimental spinal surgery costing $500,000 for a chance to walk again." Mia went rigid. Her hand stopped stroking Titan, and she looked up at Lorenzo with wary eyes. "You investigated my brother. I investigate everything," Lorenzo replied coldly. "And I know you owe $400,000. I know you work 3 jobs every day. I know you're about to lose your apartment and your brother will be transferred to a public facility if you don't pay $50,000 within 30 days. Mia said nothing. She only stared at him like a cornered animal, frightened and ready to fight. "I have a proposal," Lorenzo continued, lowering himself onto the only chair still standing nearby. "You treat Titan. Not for 1 night, not for 1 week. You work with him until he fully recovers, and in return," he paused, making sure she was listening, "I pay the full cost of your brother's surgery, $500,000. Plus, I erase all $400,000 of your debt, and I provide a monthly salary, sufficient for you to live comfortably without working 3 jobs. Mia opened her mouth, then closed it again. She blinked several times as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Nearly $1 million. He was offering her nearly $1 million to heal a dog. "Why?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "You could hire anyone in the world. Why me?" Lorenzo looked down at Titan, and for the first time Mia saw something other than cold calculation in his gray eyes. Pain, loss, love buried so deep it was almost unrecognizable. "Because this is my father's dog," he said, his voice so low she had to lean forward to hear it. "He was killed 2 years ago, assassinated in front of Titan, and since then, the dog hasn't been itself. It became a monster because it didn't know how to process the loss of its master." He looked up and met Mia's gaze. "I can't kill him. He's the last thing my father left me, but I can't let him live like this either, in pain and madness. You're the first person he hasn't tried to kill in 2 years. You're my last hope." Mia looked down at Titan, the dog now asleep on her thigh, breathing slow and peaceful. She thought of Noah, of his smile when he tried to hide his pain, of his withered legs beneath the blanket, of the surgery that might give him a chance to walk again. Then she thought of Lorenzo Corsetti's world, mafia, violence, death. "I don't want to be involved in your world," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Lorenzo didn't get angry. He simply smiled, a cold, confident smile that sent a chill down her spine. "I'm not asking for your consent, Dr. Sullivan." He stood and buttoned his suit jacket as if the conversation were over. "I'm giving you an opportunity. The only opportunity to save your brother. You can refuse and return to your miserable life, watching Noah rot in a public facility. Or you can accept and give both of us a chance to heal what's been broken." He walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back to look at her one last time. "A car will pick you up at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning," he said. "Don't make me wait." Mia didn't sleep that night. She lay on the worn-out bed in her miserable studio apartment, staring up at the ceiling blotched with yellow stains. thinking about Lorenzo Corsetti's offer, nearly $1 million. Noah's surgery, a clean slate of debt. All she had to do was step into the world of the Mafia and heal the beast all of Chicago feared. Did she have another choice? The answer was no. She had known it from the moment Lorenzo made the offer. She could pretend she still had free will. But the truth was, Noah needed that surgery, and she would do anything for her brother to have a chance to walk again, even if it meant stepping into the wolf's den. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up in front of her crumbling building. The driver was a large man with a stone-like face devoid of expression. He didn't say a word during the 40-minute drive, staring straight ahead as if Mia didn't exist. Chicago slid past the car windows, from the filthy streets of the South Side to wealthy neighborhoods lined with mansions and trees. They left the city and entered the suburbs, where the houses grew larger and the distance between them wider. Finally, the car stopped before an iron gate more than 3 meters high, decorated with ornate patterns that couldn't conceal the security cameras sweeping across it. The gate opened, and the car rolled onto a long stone driveway, flanked by rows of ancient oak trees, standing like silent sentries. And then Mia saw it. The Corsetti estate. She had imagined many things, but nothing prepared her for this. The building stretched like a palace, 3 stories high with a white limestone facade and Roman-style columns. Dozens of windows reflected the morning light like watchful eyes, perfectly manicured gardens, marble fountains, and classical statues scattered throughout like ghosts of a distant age. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress disguised as beauty. Mia stepped out of the car and immediately felt eyes watching her from every direction. Guards. At least 10 she could see, and certainly more hidden in the shadows. They carried no visible weapons, but the way they stood, the way they moved, made it clear they could kill within seconds if needed. The front doors opened and a woman stepped out. She was around 65 years old, silver hair pinned neatly into a bun, her face coldly beautiful, lined with the wrinkles of time and power. She wore a simple black dress, but Mia could tell it was designer, likely costing more than her combined annual income. The woman's eyes, the same gray as Lorenzo's, swept over Mia from head to toe with undisguised contempt. "This is the girl my son is spending nearly $1 million on," she said, her voice ice cold. "A rat from the South Side sewers." Mia stiffened. She knew she should stay silent, lower her head, act compliant in front of the mother of Chicago's most powerful mafia boss. But 6 years of humiliation, 6 years of being trampled, 6 years of swallowing shame had drained her patience dry. "I am Dr. Mia Sullivan," she replied, her voice surprisingly calm. "And I'm here to do the job no one else could do. If you're dissatisfied, you can speak to your son." Gianna Corsetti stared at her for a few seconds, gray eyes sharp as knives. Then she scoffed, a sound devoid of warmth. "You've got nerve," she said. "But nerve won't save your life here. I've watched 3 trainers fail. 1 lost an arm. Do you think you're more special than them?" Mia didn't answer. She simply stood there in silence, waiting. Gianna finally turned away and motioned for her to follow. They walked through wide corridors with soaring ceilings, walls lined with oil paintings and portraits of men with cold gray eyes, surely ancestors of the Corsetti family. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became, the dimmer the light grew, and then Mia began to hear it. The growling, low and steady, like the engine of a killing machine waiting to be activated. Gianna stopped before a steel door at the end of the basement corridor. "He's in here," she said, and for the first time there was something in her voice other than contempt, something like sorrow. "My husband's dog, the last thing he left behind. And now it's just a monster locked in the dark." She opened the door and stepped aside. Mia looked in, and her heart tightened. The room was nearly pitch black, lit only by a sliver of light from a small window high on the wall, and in the farthest corner, curled on the cold concrete floor, was Titan. The dog was chained to the wall with a thick steel chain, a heavy metal collar around its neck. The food bowl nearby was barely touched. The water bowl was empty. Its black eyes, once wild and ferocious, were now hollow and lifeless as they looked toward her. There was no attack, no threat, only the despair of a creature that had surrendered hope. Mia felt tears rise at the corners of her eyes. She had seen many broken dogs in her career, but she had never seen anything like this. This wasn't aggression. This was a heart shattering, a soul slowly dying from grief. "He's killing himself," she whispered, not to anyone in particular. "He's slowly dying from losing the one he loved most." Mia asked to be alone with Titan. Lorenzo objected. Gianna called her insane, and the entire security team looked at her as if she were volunteering for suicide. But Mia didn't back down. "If you want me to heal him, let me do it my way," she said to Lorenzo, her voice so firm it surprised even herself. "Or you can keep him locked in the dark until he dies. Choose." Lorenzo studied her for a long moment with unreadable gray eyes. Then he nodded and ordered everyone out. He was the last to leave, and before closing the door he spoke without turning back. "There are cameras in the room. If anything happens, I'll be inside in 30 seconds. The door shut, and Mia was alone with the beast. On the first day, she did nothing. She simply sat down on the cold concrete floor, about 3 meters from Titan, and stayed there. She didn't speak, didn't move closer, didn't try to touch him. She just sat, breathing evenly, radiating calm and limitless patience. Titan growled for the entire first hour, black eyes locked on her, body tense, and ready to attack if she took a single step forward. But Mia didn't take a step. She just sat there and read aloud from a book, her voice steady and gentle like running water. In the second hour, the growling weakened. In the third hour, Titan lowered his head to the floor, still watching her but no longer coiled with tension. In the fourth hour, for the first time in 2 years, the dog fell asleep in front of a stranger. Mia stayed there for 2 more hours, not daring to move, simply watching the sleeping beast with a heart full of compassion. On the second day, she repeated the routine. Sitting, reading, breathing evenly. Titan no longer growled, only observed her with eyes still cautious, but less feral. On the third day, she brought food, not to lure him, but to eat in front of him. She sat there and slowly chewed each bite of a sandwich, letting Titan see that she wasn't a threat, that she was simply another living creature sharing the space. On the fourth day, she placed a bowl of food between herself and Titan, then moved back. The dog looked at the bowl, looked at her, then looked back at the bowl. 10 minutes passed, 20 minutes. Then Titan stood up, walked over, and ate, not in frantic gulps like before, but slowly and deliberately, as if he were beginning to believe that maybe life still held something worth continuing. On the 7th day, Mia moved a meter closer. Titan didn't react. He only tilted his head and watched her, black eyes holding something closer to curiosity than threat. On the 10th day, she touched him for the first time since the night at Imperial. Just a light touch on his shoulder, lasting no more than 3 seconds. Titan stiffened but didn't attack. Progress. On the 12th day, the dog allowed her to sit beside him. On the 13th day, he rested his head on her thigh, the way he had in the restaurant, breathing slow and peaceful. And on the 14th day, the miracle happened. Mia removed the chain. Lorenzo had forbidden her to do it, but she couldn't bear to see the dog restrained another day. Her hands shook as she unlocked it, her heart pounding like a war drum, but she did it anyway. And when the chain fell to the floor with a metallic clatter, Titan didn't bolt, he didn't attack. He simply stood, stretched, and then did something no one in the Corsetti estate dared believe. He walked over to Mia and lay down beside her, not because he was forced to, but because he chose to. Mia opened the door and stepped out, her heart suspended in her chest. Titan followed. The dog walked at her side, no leash, no muzzle, moving with a calm he hadn't known since the day Don Salvatore fell. They passed through the corridor and encountered a group of guards. Large men with guns hidden beneath their jackets froze like statues, eyes wide as they stared at the beast walking freely beside the slender woman like a gentle puppy. One man reached instinctively toward his weapon, but Titan didn't even look at him. The dog simply kept walking at Mia's side, as if those men didn't exist. They stepped into the garden, where Gianna was having afternoon tea. The teacup slipped from her hand and shattered on the ground when she saw Titan unchained, walking beside Mia. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time in 2 years, the mother of Chicago's Iron Wolf didn't know what to say. And on the second-floor balcony, Lorenzo stood looking down, gray eyes never leaving the girl and his father's dog. No one could see his expression from that distance, but if anyone had been close enough, they would have seen something Lorenzo Corsetti hadn't felt in a very, very long time. Hope. In the 3rd week, Lorenzo began to appear during the therapy sessions. At first he stayed at a distance, leaning against the doorway with an unreadable expression, watching Mia work with Titan as if she were performing a kind of magic he couldn't understand. Gradually, he moved closer. One day he sat on a chair in the corner of the room. Another day he lowered himself to the floor a few meters away. Then one afternoon, while Mia was stroking Titan in the garden, he sat down beside her without saying a word. Titan lifted his head to look at his owner, and for the first time in 2 years, the dog didn't growl, didn't retreat, didn't show fear or aggression. He simply looked at Lorenzo for a moment, then rested his head on Mia's thigh, as if accepting Lorenzo's presence within the safe space she had created. "Do you want to touch him?" Mia asked softly. Lorenzo didn't answer right away. He looked at the dog, his gray eyes holding something Mia had never seen before. Hesitation, fear, and longing. "The last time I touched him was the day my father died," he said, his voice so low she had to lean closer to hear. "I tried to hold him, and he bit me." He raised his arm and pulled back the sleeve of his suit jacket, revealing a long scar along his forearm. "Ever since then, every time I get close, he looks at me like an enemy, as if he blames me for my father's death." Mia said nothing. She simply reached out, took Lorenzo's hand, and guided it toward Titan's back. His body stiffened, muscles drawn tight as a wire, but she didn't let go. Slowly, she whispered, "Let him feel you, not as a threat, but as part of the family he lost." Lorenzo's hand trembled slightly as it touched Titan's black fur. The dog lifted his head and looked at him, and for a brief instant, Mia feared everything would collapse. Then Titan lowered his head again and remained still, allowing Lorenzo to stroke him for the first time in 2 years. Mia saw it then, something breaking open in the gray eyes of Chicago's iron wolf. Not tears. Lorenzo wasn't the kind of man who cried, but something deeper. A wall cracking, a layer of ice beginning to melt. He didn't speak, just continued to stroke Titan in silence, and Mia didn't disturb the moment. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat on the balcony of the room Lorenzo had arranged for her, looking out over the garden washed in November moonlight. Then she heard footsteps. Lorenzo appeared beside her, holding 2 glasses of wine. He handed one to her and sat in the opposite chair without asking. For a long while, they just sat there in silence, staring into the dark. "Tell me about Richard Kane," Lorenzo said, his voice lacking its usual command, carrying genuine curiosity instead. Mia took a sip of wine, letting the bitter, sweet liquid slide down her throat, and began to tell him. About the years working with Kane, the mentor she had revered like a father. About the night a working dog died because of Kane's mistake, and how he placed all the blame on her. About the hearing where no one believed her, because Kane was a legend, and she was only a newly graduated student. About 6 years of losing everything, her career, her reputation, her faith in people. "He took everything from me," she finished, her voice steady though her eyes glistened under the moonlight, "and I couldn't do anything because no one believed me. I was just a naive 24-year-old girl who dared to accuse a legend." Lorenzo was silent for a long time, his fingers slowly turning the wineglass. Then he said something Mia hadn't expected. "I'll find the truth." She looked at him, stunned. "Why? You don't owe me anything." Lorenzo set the glass down and looked straight into her eyes. His gray eyes were no longer as cold as they had been in the beginning. There was something warmer there, something Mia didn't dare name. "You're giving me back the only thing my father left me," he said, his voice softening just a little. "That's a debt I don't know how to repay. Finding the truth about Kane and restoring justice for you is the least I can do." They sat there for hours more, talking about things neither of them had ever spoken aloud to anyone else. Lorenzo told her about his father, about the night he was assassinated, about the helplessness of holding his father's hand as blood slipped through his fingers. Mia told him about her parents, about the fire, about having to become an adult at 16 to raise her brother, 2 broken souls finding each other in the dark. And for the first time in a very long while, neither of them felt alone. When Mia finally stood to return to her room, Lorenzo took her hand. Just a light touch, lasting no more than 3 seconds, but it made her heart miss a beat. "Thank you," he said. And those words, coming from the Iron Wolf of Chicago, felt like a miracle. Mia didn't reply. She simply nodded and walked away, but she could feel his gaze following her until she disappeared behind the door. And that night, lying in bed and staring up at the ceiling, she realized a terrifying truth. She was beginning to feel something for Lorenzo Corsetti, the Mafia boss, the Iron Wolf, the monster of Chicago, and she didn't know whether that was the greatest fortune or the greatest disaster of her life. 1 week after that night on the balcony, Frank DeLuca knocked on the door of Lorenzo's office carrying a thick leather briefcase. The aging consigliere said nothing. He simply placed the case on the desk and opened it, revealing hundreds of pages of documents, photographs, audio recordings, and evidence that the Corsetti network had gathered over the past 2 weeks. Lorenzo read every page, his gray eyes growing colder with each line. When he finished, he sat motionless in silence for a long while, his fingers tapping lightly against the oak desk, in a steady rhythm like a countdown. "Bring her here," he ordered, his voice ice cold. Mia entered Lorenzo's office 10 minutes later. Titan closed at her side like a loyal shadow. She knew immediately that something was wrong the moment she saw his expression. Lorenzo was always difficult to read, but today there was something different in his gray eyes. Anger. Not directed at her, but at someone else. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. "There's something you need to know." Mia sat, her hand instinctively stroking Titan's head as the dog lay beside her chair. Lorenzo slid a thick file across the desk toward her. "Richard Kane," he said, and the name fell like a curse between them. "Frank dug deep into his past, and what we found is far worse than what you thought." Mia took the file with trembling hands. She opened it and began to read, and with every page she turned, her world fractured a little more. Richard Kane hadn't just betrayed her. He had been working for the Benedetto family for 10 years, training attack dogs for their underground operations, covering up criminal evidence, even participating in the planning of several assassinations. The working dog she had been accused of killing hadn't died because of her. It died because Kane made a fatal error during training, using a banned stimulant to increase aggression, and when the dog overdosed and died, he needed a scapegoat. Mia, his most brilliant student, became the perfect victim. She was young, naive, and trusted him completely. No one would believe a newly graduated student against a legend in the field. "There are recordings too," Lorenzo said, his voice softening slightly when he saw her hands shaking. "Kane talking to Carlo Benedetto about eliminating you. He laughed while describing how you cried during the hearing when no one believed you." Mia didn't look up. She just sat there, staring at the pages in her hands, feeling 6 years of injustice, 6 years of pain, 6 years of wondering whether she had truly made some unforgivable mistake, all detonate inside her chest. She had been right. For 6 years, she had been right, and no one believed her. Her parents died never knowing their daughter was innocent. Her brother had watched his sister be humiliated and stripped of her future. She lost everything, her career, her reputation, her faith in people, all because of a coward, desperate to hide his own guilt. Tears began to fall. Mia hadn't cried since the night her parents died. She had built a wall around her heart, never allowing anyone to see her weakness. But now that wall collapsed completely. She cried the way she never had before. Sobs tearing from her throat, tears soaking the pages that documented the crimes of the man who destroyed her life. Titan stood, resting his head on her thigh, a soft whine rising from his throat as if he were trying to comfort her in the only way he knew. Then Lorenzo did something Mia never expected. He stood, walked around the desk, and sat down beside her. He didn't speak. He didn't offer hollow words of comfort. He simply handed her a white silk handkerchief and sat there in silence, letting her cry. The Iron Wolf of Chicago, the man the entire city feared, sat beside a shattered woman and didn't demand that she be strong. When Mia finally looked up, her eyes swollen and her face wet with tears, she saw Lorenzo watching her with an expression she had never seen on him before. "Gentleness. I will destroy him," Lorenzo said, his voice cold, but his eyes warm as they held hers. "Kane will pay for what he did to you. I'll make sure of it." Mia wanted to ask why. Why he cared. Why a man like him would concern himself with a bartender no one knew. But she didn't ask, because when she looked into his gray eyes, she already knew the answer, and that answer made her heart, long broken, begin to beat to an unfamiliar rhythm. 3 weeks after the day Mia stepped into the Corsetti estate. Her phone rang at 3 o'clock in the morning. She was sleeping deeply with Titan curled at the foot of her bed when the ringtone tore through the quiet of the night. An unknown number. Mia sat up, her heart beating erratically in her chest. No one had her new number except Lorenzo and the people inside the estate. She answered, and the voice on the other end made the blood in her veins turn to ice. "It's been a long time, my little sister." Richard Kane. His voice was exactly as she remembered it, warm and gentle like a kind father's. But now Mia heard something buried beneath it that 6 years ago she had been too naive to recognize. Cruelty, ruthlessness, a sick pleasure in controlling others. "What do you want?" Mia asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. Kane chuckled, a sound that made her stomach churn. "Oh, you don't greet your old mentor anymore. That hurts, Mia. After everything I taught you, you destroyed my life." Mia ground her teeth. "You blamed me, took everything from me, and now you call me at 3 in the morning to make small talk." No, no," Kane replied, his voice turning colder. "I'm calling for a very specific reason. You see, I know where you are. I know what you're doing. And most importantly, I know exactly where your precious little brother is right now." Noah. Her brother's name hit her like a blade through the heart. Mia sprang out of bed, Titan rising with her, the dog's black eyes fixed on her with concern, as if he sensed the panic surging through her. "Don't touch my brother," she shouted, her voice breaking at the end. "If you lay a finger on Noah, I will—" "What will you do?" Kane cut in, his tone dripping with mockery. "You're just a bartender who's lost everything. You have nothing. You are nothing. And your brother, that poor boy stuck in a wheelchair, is completely within my reach." Mia felt her legs give out. She sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. "What do you want?" she asked again, her voice now nothing more than a desperate whisper. Kane was silent for a moment, savoring her anguish like a fine wine. "The Benedetto family wants to know everything about the Corsetti estate's security," he said. "Camera layouts, guard patrol schedules, door access codes, and most of all, the weaknesses in the defensive system. You will provide all of that information to me." Mia couldn't breathe. She looked around the room Lorenzo had arranged for her. The beautiful room with its soft bed and velvet curtains, inside the mansion of the man who had given her hope for the first time in 6 years. And Kane was demanding she betray it all. "I can't," she whispered. Lorenzo Corsetti won't do anything if he's dead," Kane replied coolly. "And if you don't cooperate, Noah will die first. I have my people right outside the rehabilitation center as we speak. One phone call, and your brother will have an unfortunate accident, maybe a fire, maybe suffocation in his sleep. There are many ways to kill a man in a wheelchair without anyone suspecting a thing." Tears streamed down Mia's face. She thought of Noah, of his smile when she visited, of the way he tried to stay cheerful despite the pain, of his withered legs he dreamed would one day walk again. Then she thought of Lorenzo, of the gray eyes that had looked at her with a gentleness she never imagined a mafia boss could possess, of the way he sat beside her while she cried, without judgment, without demanding she be strong, of his promise to restore justice to her life. Betray Lorenzo or let Noah die. That wasn't a choice. It was torture. "You have 2 days, Kane said, his voice returning to that false paternal warmth. "Don't try to tell Corsetti or anyone else. If I find out, Noah will be dead before you finish explaining. And don't think you can fool me, Mia. I know you too well. I'm the one who taught you everything, remember?" The call ended. Mia sat in the darkness, the phone still pressed to her ear though the line was dead. Titan stepped closer and rested his head on her thigh, a soft whine leaving his throat as if he were trying to comfort her. But Mia couldn't be comforted. She looked down into Titan's loyal black eyes and felt her heart shatter into a million pieces. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not knowing whether she was speaking to the dog, to Lorenzo, or to herself. "I don't have a choice." That night, Mia didn't sleep. She sat on the bed staring out the window, counting every second of the 48 hours Kane had given her. 48 hours to decide who would die. Her brother, or the man she was beginning to love. Mia spent the next 24 hours in a private hell of torment and division. She tried to contact the rehabilitation center where Noah was staying, but no one answered. She called again and again, dozens of times, and every unanswered ring made the fear inside her grow heavier. Kane wasn't lying. He had people everywhere. He could kill Noah at any moment, and she could do nothing to stop it. On the second night after the call, when the entire estate had fallen asleep, Mia slipped out of her room. Titan lifted his head and looked at her, black eyes filled with confusion, but she signaled for the dog to stay. "Lie down," she whispered, her voice tightening. "I'll be back." She knew it was a lie. If she was caught, she would never see Titan or Lorenzo or this estate again, but she had no choice. Noah was her blood, the only person left in this world who truly belonged to her, and she would do anything to protect him, even betraying the man who had given her hope. Mia had learned the layout of the estate over the past 3 weeks. She knew the security room was in the basement, knew the guards' patrol schedules, knew which cameras had blind spots and which hallways were least used at night. She moved like a ghost through the dark corridors, her heart pounding like a war drum, cold sweat sliding down her spine. The security room wasn't locked at night because someone was always on duty, but Mia knew that at 3 a.m, the night guard usually stepped out for a smoke for 15 minutes. She had observed it, memorized it, prepared for this moment even though she hated herself for doing so. She slipped into the security room just as the guard stepped outside. The computer screens glowed brightly, showing dozens of camera angles throughout the estate. Mia sat down, her heart racing out of control, and began copying security layouts, camera locations, patrol schedules, door access codes, weak points in the defense system. She plugged the USB into the computer and transferred each file, every second feeling like a year. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the USB twice. Her eyes burned from the tears she was forcing back, and then she heard footsteps. Mia froze. She turned and saw Titan standing in the doorway, black eyes fixed on her without blinking. The dog had followed her down here, silent as the dark itself, and now he stood there, head tilted slightly, looking at her with confusion and hurt she couldn't bear. "I'm sorry," Mia whispered, the tears finally falling. "I don't have a choice." She pulled the USB out and ran, past Titan, up the stairs, out of the estate, through a back exit she knew had no cameras. She ran as if the devil himself were chasing her. And maybe that was true, because the devil in this case was her own conscience. She met Kane's man at the designated spot, a dark alley 2 kilometers from the estate. The man said nothing, just snatched the USB from her hand and disappeared into the night. Mia stood there alone, trembling in the November cold, and felt a part of herself die. When she returned to the estate, dawn was breaking. She hoped she could slip back to her room unnoticed, pretend nothing had happened, live with this betrayal until Kane was satisfied and left Noah alone. But when she stepped into the main hallway, Lorenzo was standing there waiting for her. His gray eyes were ice cold, his face a mask without expression she hadn't seen since the first night at Imperiale. Frank stood beside him, holding a tablet displaying security footage of her copying data in the security room. "I trusted you," Lorenzo said, his voice cold and steady like a funeral bell. "For the first time in years, I trusted someone outside my family. I let you into my home, gave you access to my father's dog, let you know things my enemies would kill to obtain. And you stabbed me in the back." Mia wanted to explain. She wanted to tell him about Kane, about the threat, about Noah, about the choice that wasn't a choice at all. But when she opened her mouth, Lorenzo raised his hand and stopped her. "Don't," he said, and that single word carried the weight of 1,000 curses. "I don't want excuses. I don't want reasons. You betrayed me, and that's all I need to know." He turned to Frank. "Get her out of here, and make sure she never sets foot on any Corsetti property again. Lorenzo." Mia tried one last time, her voice breaking. "Please listen to me. They're going to attack." "They will." But Lorenzo had already turned away, and he didn't look back. Titan stood in the middle of the hallway, looking from his master walking away to the woman being dragged out, the dog whining softly, pacing back and forth, unable to choose whom to follow. For the first time since Mia had healed him, Titan looked like a creature being torn apart by grief. Mia was pushed out of the estate at dawn with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart completely shattered. She stood outside the iron gates, looking back at the mansion slowly lighting up under the early morning sun, and she knew she had lost everything. Again. But this time, she hadn't lost it because she was betrayed. She had lost it because she herself had become the betrayer. And that pain was 1,000 times worse. Mia didn't leave. She couldn't. After being forced out through the iron gates, she managed to walk barely a kilometer before her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the roadside, sitting there for hours and staring into nothingness while thinking about Noah, about Lorenzo, about the impossible choice she had been forced to make, until night fell, and a single thought tore her out of the numbness. Kane already had the information. They were going to attack, and Lorenzo didn't know when. She had tried to warn him, but he hadn't listened, too angry and too wounded by her betrayal to hear anything she said, and now he was going to die because of it. Mia staggered to her feet and started running back toward the estate, not knowing what she planned to do or whether she could do anything at all, but unable to sit there and let Lorenzo die, not because of herself, not because of the information she had stolen, but because she loved him. She was halfway there when gunfire ripped through the quiet suburban night, sharp explosions echoing like thunder in a dead storm, her heart stopping for a beat before slamming violently against her ribs as she ran faster with burning lungs and screaming legs, refusing to stop. When she reached the perimeter, the sight froze her in horror. The iron gates blown open, 2 black trucks blocking the entrance, gunfire cracking from every direction, shouts, shattered glass, muzzle flashes flickering like deadly fireflies in the dark. The Benedetto family had come, and they had come in force. Mia counted at least 30 gunmen pouring onto the grounds with terrifying precision, knowing exactly where the cameras were blind, where the patrols would be, where to strike, and where to advance safely, all because of her. Because the information she had stolen was now being used to kill the people who had given her a home. Inside the estate, hell had opened its doors, as Lorenzo's men fought fiercely but were outnumbered and outmaneuvered, Benedetto shooters moving as if they had rehearsed this assault 100 times. In the main living room, Gianna Corsetti was trying to get her young granddaughter, Lorenzo's niece staying overnight, out of danger when a Benedetto squad burst in, and the 65-year-old woman didn't hesitate, shoving the child behind her, drawing the compact pistol she always carried, dropping the first 2 men before the 3rd bullet slammed into her shoulder, sending her to the floor as blood bloomed across her elegant black dress. Yet she kept hold of the gun and shielded her screaming granddaughter with her body. The mother of the Iron Wolf of Chicago, ready to die before anyone touched her family. Word of her injury reached Lorenzo through his radio amid the chaos, and he was fighting on the second floor when he heard it. And for the first time in his life, the Iron Wolf lost control, tearing toward the living room and cutting down 3 Benedetto men along the way. Unaware, he was running straight into a trap, where Marco Benedetto waited with 10 of the family's most elite gunmen. Marco was 32, vicious and impulsive, the son of Don Carlo Benedetto, burning with hatred since Lorenzo had humiliated his father during a negotiation 5 years earlier. And tonight was revenge, beginning with Lorenzo's death right in front of his mother. Lorenzo stepped into the living room and instantly found himself surrounded by 10 guns aimed at him from every direction, freezing as his gray eyes swept the room in a split second, seeing his mother bleeding but alive and staring at him, not with fear for herself but with terror for her son, his niece sobbing behind her grandmother, and Marco Benedetto grinning with his gun, pointed straight at Lorenzo's chest, spitting contempt as he mocked the Iron Wolf finally caught without anyone to command. Lorenzo didn't answer, standing tall with squared shoulders and meeting death with the cold pride of Corsetti blood, as he thought of his father who had died the same way 2 years earlier, surrounded and unyielding, thought of Titan, the dog he had locked in darkness for 2 years until a thin woman with sad eyes had appeared and healed him, and thought of Mia, of her betrayal, of the pain in her eyes when she tried to explain, of the warning he hadn't listened to when she said they would attack. Now it was too late. He told Marco to do it, swearing that even from hell he would find him if he touched his mother or niece. And Marco laughed, finger tightening on the trigger as he promised to send them down together. And then a sound tore through the chaos, not gunfire and not human, but a thunderous bone-deep roar that shook the room like an earthquake, wiping the smile from Marco's face as a massive black shape launched itself forward from the shattered doorway behind him. Titan. Mia didn't enter through the main gate. In the 3 weeks she had lived at the estate, she had learned every hidden corner of the place, including a secret passage Gianna had once mentioned by accident on a rare afternoon, when the woman hadn't looked at her with open contempt, an old tunnel leading from the rear garden into the basement, built in Lorenzo's great-grandfather's time as an emergency escape. Mia ran through the garden, dodging Benedetto gunmen who were busy trading fire with Corsetti guards, and found the tunnel entrance hidden behind a stone angel statue, plunging into the darkness with her heart pounding like a war drum and her lungs burning for air. When she emerged in the basement, the first sound she heard was barking. Titan, the dog, was locked in his old room, where Lorenzo had ordered him confined after discovering Mia's betrayal, and he was snarling madly, raking his claws against the steel door as he tried to break free and protect the family he loved. Mia ran to the door and threw it open. Titan burst out like a black bullet, but instead of attacking her, he stopped, met her eyes for a brief moment with his dark gaze blazing, then sprinted toward the sound of gunfire. He had chosen forgiveness. "Let's go," Mia whispered, and she ran after him through hallways, thick with smoke and the smell of blood. They reached the living room just as Marco Benedetto squeezed the trigger. Titan didn't need a command. The dog hurled himself into the room at terrifying speed, 120 pounds of muscle and fangs becoming a whirlwind of destruction, slamming into the 2 nearest gunmen and taking them down before they even understood what was happening. His roar thundered through the room, and for a heartbeat everyone froze in primal terror. Marco swung his gun toward the dog, but Lorenzo was faster. He ripped a weapon from the hands of a panicked Benedetto guard and fired into Marco's shoulder, sending him crashing to the floor with a scream. The room dissolved into chaos. Benedetto shooters tried to fight back, but they were facing a beast without fear and a Mafia boss consumed by fury. Lorenzo fought like a wolf driven into a corner, dropping enemy after enemy with merciless precision, and then Mia saw him. Richard Kane stood in the corner of the room, where he had hidden throughout the attack like a vulture waiting for corpses. And when he saw the tide turn, he tried to slip out the back door, but his eyes met Mia's, and he stopped. A cruel smile spread across Kane's face as he drew his gun and aimed it at her. "You should have listened, little one," he said, his voice still warm like a loving father's even as he held the weapon. "You could have lived. You could have kept your brother, but instead you chose to come back here and die with them." Mia stood still, not running, not begging. She had been running from this man for 6 years, letting him steal her life, her dignity, her future. But tonight she wasn't running anymore. "You can't hurt me anymore," she said, her voice strangely calm. "You already took everything from me. What's left to lose?" Kane laughed and pulled the trigger, but the bullet never reached Mia. Titan lunged from the side, his massive body slamming into Kane with the force of a runaway truck, knocking him to the floor as the gun skidded away. And before he could scream, Titan's jaws closed around the arm holding the weapon, not tearing, not crushing, just holding with perfect pressure, enough to cause unbearable pain without permanent injury, restraint, and control, exactly as Mia had taught him. Mia stepped forward and looked down at the man who had destroyed her life. Kane sprawled on the floor with his face twisted in pain and terror, completely helpless beneath the jaws of the beast he had underestimated. "Titan, hold," Mia commanded coldly. "Good boy. Perfect." Lorenzo appeared beside her, clothes smeared with blood and gunpowder, gray eyes fixed on her with something unreadable and complex. "You came back," he said. "Not a question." "I couldn't let you die," Mia replied without looking at him. "Not because of me, not because of the information I stole." They stood in silence for a moment amid the wreckage of fallen enemies and the groans of the wounded as Lorenzo's reinforcements arrived and crushed the remaining Benedetto men, Marco bound and captured to be used as leverage against his father, while Kane remained pinned beneath Titan, waiting for a fate he knew would not be gentle. Mia finally turned to Lorenzo. "They'll never touch Noah," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Kane lied. "He always lies." "I know," Lorenzo replied, and for the first time since he discovered her betrayal, something softened in his gray eyes. Frank checked. "Noah is safe. The threat was a bluff. They just needed you afraid enough to cooperate." Mia's legs gave out as the truth hit her. She had betrayed Lorenzo and nearly gotten him killed, all because of a lie. Tears streamed down her face and she didn't stop them. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry." Lorenzo didn't answer with words. He reached out, took her arm, and pulled her to her feet, his gray eyes holding hers as Mia saw something she hadn't dared hope for. Forgiveness. Dawn rose over the Corsetti estate, pale golden sunlight spilling through shattered windows and walls scarred by bullet holes. The battle finished, but its traces lingering everywhere like scars on a warrior's body. Marco Benedetto was handed over to federal authorities, along with evidence of his family's criminal operations, enough to force Don Carlo into retreat and into signing a peace treaty he had no power to refuse. Richard Kane was delivered to the people Lorenzo trusted most, together with the full record of his crimes over the past 20 years, from training attack dogs for the Mafia to framing an innocent student to hide his own failures, and he would spend the rest of his life in federal prison, while his legendary reputation collapsed into ashes. Gianna was rushed into emergency care that same night, and doctors confirmed she would recover fully after several weeks of rest. When Mia visited her in the hospital, the older woman no longer looked at her with the contempt she once had. "You came back," Gianna said, her voice weak, but her gray eyes still sharp. "You saved my son. You saved my granddaughter. You saved this entire family even after we drove you away." Mia didn't know what to say. She stood there, gripping the edge of the hospital bed, fighting back tears. "From now on," Gianna continued more softly, "you're my daughter. Anyone who dares touch you will face the entire Corsetti family." 1 week after the attack, a luxury car pulled up at the estate gates. Mia stood on the steps with her heart racing as the door opened. Noah was wheeled out in a brand new wheelchair, his face brighter than she had seen in 3 years. "Sis," he said excitedly, "this place is amazing. Mr. Corsetti said I can stay here and do physical therapy here. There's a private doctor and the most advanced equipment. Can you believe it?" Mia dropped to her knees and hugged her brother tightly, finally letting tears of joy fall. She had fought for 3 years to give Noah a better life, and now he finally had it. Not because she betrayed anyone, but because she had been brave enough to come back and make things right. Noah's spinal surgery was scheduled with the best specialist in the world, fully paid for by Lorenzo, and doctors said the success rate was 70%, and for the first time in 3 years, Mia dared to hope her brother would walk again. 1 month later, Mia's name was fully cleared. Evidence of Kane's betrayal was made public, and universities that once turned their backs on her now sent invitations asking her to return to teaching, but she declined them all. "I've found where I belong," she told Noah when he asked why, and that place wasn't in university lecture halls. Mia began her new work training dogs for the Corsetti family, but in a completely different way from Kane's methods, with no violence, no fear, only patience and care. Titan became her assistant, the once legendary savage dog now strangely gentle with the puppies she trained. The night before Noah's surgery, Mia stood on the balcony, overlooking the glittering lights of Chicago. Lorenzo joined her, hands in his pockets, gray eyes fixed on the horizon. "Do you regret it?" he asked, "being pulled into this world, into this life?" Mia turned to look at him, the man the city feared, the man who gave her a second chance when no one else did, the man who forgave her even after her betrayal. "Your world is dangerous," she said, "full of violence and darkness." "I know," he replied, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere else." Lorenzo smiled, a rare smile she knew was only for her. "The bartender who tamed the beast," he said, "and the beast who tamed the Iron Wolf's heart." He pulled her into his arms, their first kiss under the Chicago moonlight, gentle and full of promise. At their feet, Titan lay peacefully, tail tapping softly against the stone floor like a rhythm of happiness. 3 broken souls had found each other and built something unbreakable. The bartender was no longer just a bartender. The beast was no longer a beast. And the Iron Wolf, for the first time in his life, learned that true strength isn't in fangs or power, but in what we're willing to protect and who we allow into our hearts. This story reminds us that what's broken can be healed if we have enough patience and enough love, that forgiveness isn't weakness but the greatest strength of all, and that sometimes the places we least expect become home, and the people we fear most become family. Mia lost everything, but she didn't give up. She kept fighting, kept loving, and in the end found happiness where few would ever expect it. And you, how did this story make you feel? Have you ever faced moments when it seemed you had lost everything, only to find light at the end of the tunnel? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. We want to hear what's in your heart, your own stories, and how you connect this story to your real life. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and share to support us in bringing you more moving stories every day. Your support is our greatest motivation to continue this journey. We wish everyone watching good health, a life filled with joy and peace each day. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. Goodbye and see you in the next video.